Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Derek Blair adjusted his tactical vest in the pre-dawn darkness of the Arizona desert, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. As a federal fugitive recovery specialist, he'd spent the last 15 years tracking down the most dangerous criminals who thought they could disappear into America's vast wilderness. His success rate was legendary, a perfect 100% recovery rate with 0 civilian casualties and minimal damage to the targets he brought in alive. At 42, Derek possessed the lean, scarred physique of someone who'd learned violence as a profession and refined it as an art. His steel-gray eyes had seen enough darkness to fill libraries, but they still softened when his phone displayed the caller ID that mattered most. "Ashley, my princess." "Hey, baby girl," Derek answered, stepping away from his team as they prepared to breach a compound where 3 armed fugitives had been hiding for 6 months. "Daddy." The 7-year-old voice on the other end was bright with excitement. "I lost another tooth. The tooth fairy brought me $5 whole." Derek smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his hard features into something approaching warmth. $5? That's inflation for you. When I was your age, I got a quarter. Mommy says you're getting old." "Mommy's not wrong, sweetheart. Are you being good for her?" "Yes, Daddy. Vincent made pancakes this morning. He put chocolate chips in them just like you do." Derek's jaw tightened at the mention of his ex-wife's boyfriend, but he kept his voice level. Vincent Michael had been dating Sabrina for 8 months, and Ashley seemed to genuinely like him. That bothered Derek more than he cared to admit. "That sounds delicious, princess. I'll be home in 3 days, and we'll have our weekend together. Maybe we can go to that new trampoline park you wanted to try." "Really? Vincent said those places are dangerous and I might get hurt." "Well, Vincent doesn't know everything about keeping people safe. That's Daddy's job." Derek's team leader signaled that they were moving into position. The conversation would have to end soon, but he treasured these moments more than any commendation or bonus payment. "I have to go to work now, baby girl. Remember what Daddy taught you about staying safe. Trust my instincts. Never go anywhere with strangers, and if someone makes me uncomfortable, scream as loud as I can and run away." "That's my smart girl. I love you, Ashley." "I love you too, Daddy. Catch the bad guys." Derek ended the call and transformed back into the predator his fugitives feared. The compound breach went exactly as planned. 3 armed felons in custody within 12 minutes, no shots fired, and a massive drug operation dismantled. But throughout the operation, Derek's mind kept returning to Vincent's comment about the trampoline park being dangerous. Derek Blair had been born into violence. His father, Glenn O'Neill, had been a decorated Marine Corps sniper who'd returned from Vietnam with skills that didn't translate well to civilian life. Glenn had taught his son that the world was full of predators, and the only way to protect what you loved was to be a more dangerous predator than anything hunting you. Derek's childhood had been a military academy disguised as family life. By age 10, he could field strip and reassemble a rifle blindfolded. By 12, he could track a target through any terrain. By 15, he understood that violence was a tool like any other, morally neutral until someone decided how to use it. After high school, Derek had followed his father into the Marines, where his natural talents for tracking and tactical thinking had made him invaluable. 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan had refined his skills while teaching him the psychological aspects of hunting human beings. Unlike many soldiers, Derek had discovered that he possessed an almost supernatural ability to understand criminal psychology, to think like his targets and anticipate their moves. When he'd returned from his final deployment, Derek had channeled his skills into federal law enforcement. Fugitive recovery offered the perfect combination of hunting, tactical planning, and legal authority. More importantly, it provided the kind of income that could support the family he'd always wanted. He'd met Sabrina Hastings at a charity event for wounded veterans. She'd been a volunteer coordinator, beautiful and compassionate, with the kind of gentle nature that seemed to balance Derek's harder edges. Their courtship had been intense but brief. Derek wasn't someone who did anything halfway. The marriage had been good for the first few years. Sabrina had understood that Derek's work was dangerous and demanding, but she'd supported his career because she believed in the importance of what he did. When Ashley was born, Derek had thought he'd found the perfect life. Meaningful work that made the world safer, a loving wife who understood him, and a daughter who represented everything pure and good in his world. But the demands of Derek's profession had eventually taken their toll. Weeks away from home, the constant stress of dangerous operations and the psychological weight of hunting human predators had created distance between Derek and Sabrina. She'd grown tired of wondering if her husband would come home alive, tired of explaining to Ashley why Daddy missed school plays and birthday parties, tired of being married to someone who lived in a world of violence and danger. The divorce had been civilized but painful. Derek had agreed to generous custody arrangements and financial support because he genuinely wanted Sabrina to be happy. He'd even supported her decision to relocate to Phoenix for a fresh start, though it meant seeing Ashley only on weekends and school breaks. What Derek hadn't anticipated was how quickly Sabrina would find someone new. Vincent Michael was everything Derek wasn't: steady, predictable, safe. He worked as a regional manager for a medical supply company, owned a comfortable suburban home, and had never fired a weapon or tracked a fugitive through hostile territory. Vincent was also younger than Derek, better looking in a conventional sense, and completely unthreatened by the idea of having a dangerous job. He represented the normal life that Sabrina had always wanted but couldn't have with Derek. Derek had met Vincent twice during custody exchanges, and both encounters had left him with an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite define. Vincent was polite and appropriate, saying all the right things about respecting Derek's relationship with Ashley and supporting the co-parenting arrangement. But something in his eyes, a calculating quality, a hint of smugness, suggested there was more beneath the surface. Derek's instincts had been honed by 15 years of hunting people who specialized in deception. Vincent Michael was hiding something, but Derek couldn't identify what it was. The man's background check had revealed nothing suspicious: steady employment, clean criminal record, no history of violence or financial problems. On paper, Vincent was exactly the kind of man any divorced woman would want to date. But Derek's father had taught him that paper lied, people lied, and the only truth that mattered was what someone did when they thought no one was watching. Now, sitting in his hotel room after the successful compound raid, Derek found himself thinking about Vincent's comment regarding the trampoline park. It was a small thing, probably meaningless, but it represented a pattern Derek had been noticing. Vincent seemed determined to position himself as more knowledgeable about child safety than Ashley's actual father. Derek pulled out his laptop and began researching Vincent Michael more thoroughly than he had during the initial background check. If Vincent was going to be a permanent fixture in Ashley's life, Derek wanted to understand exactly who this man was. What he found in the public records was exactly what he'd expected: a model citizen with no apparent secrets. But Derek had access to databases and investigative resources that went far beyond public records. If Vincent Michael had any hidden darkness in his past, Derek would find it. As Derek began his deep dive into Vincent's history, he had no way of knowing that his research would soon become irrelevant. In less than 72 hours, Vincent would reveal his true nature in a way that would make Derek's investigation unnecessary. The phone call that would change everything was still 3 days away. But Derek's preparation for that moment had already begun, guided by instincts that had kept him alive through 100 dangerous operations. Vincent Michael had no idea that he was about to threaten the one person on Earth that Derek Blair would kill to protect. That mistake would cost him everything. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Sabrina Hastings stood in her kitchen, watching Vincent Michael flip pancakes while Ashley sat at the breakfast table, chattering about her upcoming weekend with her father. The scene should have felt domestic and comfortable, but lately, Sabrina had been noticing things that made her increasingly uneasy. Vincent's charm, which had initially attracted her, was beginning to feel calculated. His comments about Derek were becoming more frequent and more pointed. Most disturbing, his interactions with Ashley were shifting in ways that made Sabrina's maternal instincts whisper warnings she didn't want to acknowledge. "Daddy's going to take me to the trampoline park," Ashley announced, syrup dripping from her fork. Vincent's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Those places are lawsuits waiting to happen. Your father should know better than to risk your safety for entertainment." "Derek's very careful about Ashley's safety," Sabrina said, defending her ex-husband despite their complicated history. "Is he? How many times has he missed custody visits because of work emergencies? How many times has Ashley had to cancel plans because Daddy's chasing criminals in the desert?" Vincent's tone was reasonable, but Sabrina heard the underlying poison. She'd made the mistake of venting her frustrations about Derek's demanding career during the early stages of their relationship, and Vincent had been systematically using that information against Derek ever since. Derek's job is important, Sabrina replied firmly. He helps keep dangerous people off the streets, at the expense of his relationship with his daughter. Ashley needs stability, not a part-time father who treats parenting like a hobby he fits in between hunting fugitives. Ashley looked up from her pancakes, confusion clouding her 7-year-old features. Vincent, Daddy's job is to catch bad guys. That's important work. Vincent's expression darkened for just a moment, a flash of something ugly that disappeared so quickly Sabrina almost missed it. But Ashley didn't miss it, and Sabrina saw her daughter instinctively lean away from Vincent. Of course it is, sweetheart, Vincent said, his voice returning to its practiced gentleness. I just worry about you, that's all. I want to make sure you're always safe and happy. But the damage was done. Ashley had seen something in Vincent's face that frightened her, and Sabrina had seen it too. For the first time since they'd started dating, Sabrina found herself wondering if she really knew the man she'd been considering marrying. The relationship had begun 6 months after her divorce was finalized. Sabrina had been lonely, struggling to rebuild her life as a single mother, and Vincent had appeared at exactly the right moment. He'd been charming, attentive, and most importantly, nothing like Derek. Where Derek was intense and dangerous, Vincent was calm and safe. Where Derek's work took him away for weeks at a time, Vincent had a predictable schedule that allowed him to be present for the daily routine of family life. Vincent had courted Sabrina with old-fashioned romance, flowers, expensive dinners, thoughtful gifts that showed he'd been listening to her conversations. He'd been patient about physical intimacy, respectful of her boundaries, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. After years of being married to someone whose attention was always divided between his family and his dangerous profession, Vincent's focused devotion had been intoxicating. But more importantly, Vincent had seemed genuinely fond of Ashley. He'd brought her small gifts, remembered her favorite foods, and spent hours playing games that Derek's schedule rarely allowed. Ashley had warmed to him quickly, appreciating the stability and predictability he brought to their lives. The first warning sign had been subtle. Vincent had begun making small criticisms of Derek's parenting. Nothing overt, just casual observations about missed calls, canceled visits, and the emotional impact of Derek's absences on Ashley. Sabrina had initially agreed with some of these points. Derek's career demands had been a major factor in their divorce. But as the months passed, Vincent's comments had become more frequent and more pointed. He'd started suggesting that Ashley would be better off with minimal contact with her father, that Derek's influence was too destabilizing for a young girl who needed consistency. Most disturbingly, he'd begun hinting that he'd be willing to adopt Ashley if Derek could be convinced to relinquish his parental rights. The suggestion had horrified Sabrina. Whatever problems existed between her and Derek, he was a devoted father who loved Ashley more than life itself. The idea of cutting him out of Ashley's life was not only cruel, but potentially illegal. When Sabrina had rejected the adoption idea, Vincent's reaction had been revealing. Instead of accepting her decision gracefully, he'd become sullen and argumentative. He'd accused Sabrina of being unable to move on from her marriage, of putting Derek's feelings ahead of Ashley's best interests, and of being selfish about her daughter's future. The arguments had escalated over the past month, with Vincent becoming increasingly possessive and controlling. He'd started monitoring Sabrina's phone calls, questioning her about her activities when he wasn't around, and making passive-aggressive comments about her loyalty to their relationship. Most concerning, his behavior toward Ashley had changed. Where he'd once been patient and playful, he'd become demanding and critical. He'd started insisting on discipline for minor infractions, questioning Ashley's accounts of activities with her father, and subtly undermining Derek's authority in Ashley's eyes. 2 weeks ago, Sabrina had walked into the living room to find Vincent gripping Ashley's arm tightly while lecturing her about spilling juice on the coffee table. The grip had left marks, and Ashley's tears suggested this wasn't the first time Vincent had used physical intimidation to enforce his rules. When Sabrina had confronted him about it, Vincent had been dismissive. The girl needs discipline. You're too soft on her, and Derek's never around to provide structure. Someone has to teach her consequences. Don't ever put your hands on my daughter again, Sabrina had said, her voice carrying a steel that surprised them both. Vincent's response had been a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ashley will be our daughter soon enough. I'm just trying to help her become the kind of child we can both be proud of. The possessive language had chilled Sabrina more than the physical aggression. Vincent was talking about Ashley as if she were already his property, as if Derek's role in her life was temporary and subject to Vincent's approval. That night, Sabrina had called her sister Carolina Lindsay for advice. Carolina was a family law attorney who'd handled Sabrina's divorce, and her reaction to Vincent's behavior had been immediate and alarming. "Sabrina, what you're describing sounds like classic abuser escalation," Carolina had said. "He's testing boundaries, establishing control, and positioning himself to isolate Ashley from her father. You need to be very careful." "But he's never actually hurt either of us," Sabrina had protested. "He's just intense about discipline." Physical marks on a child's arm from gripping isn't discipline, it's assault. And his comments about adoption suggest he's planning a long-term strategy to eliminate Derek from Ashley's life. "That's not normal behavior for a boyfriend, Sabrina. That's predatory behavior." Carolina's words had forced Sabrina to confront uncomfortable truths about her relationship. Vincent's charm, which had initially seemed genuine, was beginning to feel like a carefully constructed facade designed to gain access to her and Ashley. His criticisms of Derek weren't motivated by concern for Ashley's well-being. They were attempts to undermine the most important relationship in Ashley's life. But acknowledging these truths meant admitting that Sabrina had put her daughter at risk by allowing Vincent into their lives. It meant facing the possibility that her judgment about men was fundamentally flawed, that her need for companionship and stability had blinded her to obvious warning signs. Now, watching Vincent interact with Ashley over breakfast, Sabrina saw the calculation behind his every gesture. The way he monitored Ashley's reactions to gauge how much authority he could assert. The way he positioned himself between Ashley and the phone when Derek called. The way he subtly discouraged Ashley from sharing details about their home life with her father. Vincent Michael wasn't the safe, stable man Sabrina had thought she was dating. He was something much more dangerous. A predator who'd identified a vulnerable single mother and her child as targets for his need to control and dominate. But Sabrina was trapped by her own choices. She'd moved in with Vincent 3 months ago, combining their households and finances in ways that made separation complicated. More importantly, she was terrified of how Vincent might react if she tried to end their relationship. The flash of ugly anger she'd seen in his face this morning suggested he wouldn't accept rejection gracefully. As Ashley finished her breakfast and prepared for school, Sabrina made a decision that would prove to be the most important of her life. She would start documenting Vincent's behavior, gathering evidence of his increasingly controlling and inappropriate actions. If necessary, she would contact Derek and ask for his help in protecting Ashley. Sabrina had no way of knowing that her decision was coming too late. Vincent's patience with their family dynamic was already exhausted, and his plans for eliminating Derek's influence had progressed far beyond passive-aggressive comments and subtle manipulation. In less than 72 hours, Vincent would make a move that would reveal his true nature to both Sabrina and Derek. That revelation would trigger consequences neither of them could imagine, orchestrated by a man whose profession was hunting predators and whose love for his daughter knew no limits. The foundation of their carefully constructed lives was about to shatter completely. Chapter 3. The Call. Derek Blair was 500 miles from home, sitting in a surveillance vent outside a compound in Nevada where 3 armed fugitives had been hiding for 2 weeks. His team was preparing for a dawn raid that would require split-second timing and absolute precision. The targets were dangerous. 2 had killed federal agents during their initial arrest attempts, and the third was wanted for a series of violent bank robberies across 3 states. His phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Ashley's contact information lit up the screen, and Derek immediately answered despite the operational protocols that discouraged personal calls during active missions. "Hey, princess, isn't it past your bedtime?" The sound that came through the phone made Derek's blood freeze. Ashley was crying. Not the normal tears of an upset child, but the broken sobs of someone who'd been genuinely frightened and hurt. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice shaking with terror. "Mommy's boyfriend hit me again. He said if I tell you, he'll hurt you too." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. Every protective instinct he'd inherited from 15 years of military and law enforcement training exploded into white-hot rage that took enormous effort to control. Ashley, baby, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Are you hurt right now? My arm hurts where he grabbed me, and my face stings from when he slapped me. But Daddy, I'm scared. He gets so angry, and Mommy won't stop him anymore. Derek's hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. Vincent Michael had crossed the only line that mattered. He'd put his hands on Ashley in anger. Everything else became secondary to that fundamental fact. Where are you right now, sweetheart? In my bedroom. Vincent told me to go to my room and think about what I did wrong. But Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong. I just spilled some milk, and he got so mad. You didn't do anything wrong, Ashley. Adults should never hit children, especially not for accidents. Can you hear Vincent and Mommy talking? They're fighting in the kitchen. Vincent is yelling at Mommy, and she's crying. Derek closed his eyes and forced himself to think tactically. He was 500 miles away with no immediate way to reach Ashley. The local police might respond to a welfare check, but that could escalate the situation and put Ashley in more danger. He needed to gather information and plan his response carefully. Ashley, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to call Mommy in a few minutes, and things might get loud and scary. No matter what happens, I want you to stay in your room with the door locked. Can you lock your bedroom door? Yes, Daddy. Good girl. Lock it now, and don't open it for anyone except Mommy. If Vincent tries to come in, you scream as loud as you can and call 911. Do you understand? Yes, Daddy. But I'm scared. What if he hurts Mommy? Derek's heart broke at the fear in his daughter's voice. Ashley was 7 years old, and she was already learning to live in terror of an adult who should have been protecting her. I'm going to make sure you and Mommy are safe, baby girl. I promise you that. Vincent will never hurt you again. Daddy, he said he'd hurt you if I told. He said you think you're tough, but he could make you disappear and no one would ever find you. The threat was so absurd it would have been laughable under different circumstances. Vincent Michael had no idea who he was threatening or what Derek was capable of when someone threatened his family. Don't worry about me, Ashley. Vincent doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll be home soon, and we're going to fix this whole situation. Promise. I promise, sweetheart. Now lock your door and try to get some sleep. Everything will be better tomorrow. Derek ended the call and immediately dialed Sabrina's number. She answered on the second ring, and he could hear the tension in her voice before she spoke. Derek, I know why you're calling in. Sabrina, what the hell is going on over there? Ashley just called me crying because Vincent hit her. She's exaggerating, Sabrina said, but her voice lacked conviction. Vincent was disciplining her for making a mess, and she's just upset because she's not used to structure. The response stunned Derek into momentary silence. The woman he'd once loved, the mother of his child, was defending a man who'd struck their daughter. Sabrina, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for a man who hit a 7-year-old girl. What happened to the woman who would have killed anyone who threatened Ashley? Nothing happened to me. You're the one who left us for your precious career, remember? Vincent stepped up when you chose hunting criminals over being a father. Derek heard Vincent's voice in the background, coaching Sabrina's responses. Tell her Daddy he's next. Vincent yelled loud enough for Derek to hear clearly. The threat was the final straw. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper that his team members would have recognized as a danger signal. Sabrina, put Vincent on the phone. Now. Derek, don't make this worse than it already is. Put him on the phone. There was a moment of silence. Then Vincent's voice came through the line with arrogant confidence. This is Vincent. I understand you're upset, but Sabrina and Ashley are my family now. You need to accept that and stop interfering in our lives. Vincent, my name is Derek Blair. For the past 15 years, I've made my living hunting down people who think they can hide from consequences. I've tracked killers through 3 countries and brought them back alive because that's what the law requires. Derek paused to let that information sink in before continuing. But you just threatened my daughter and issued a challenge to me personally. The law doesn't protect people who threaten children, Vincent. It especially doesn't protect them from fathers who have very specific skills in dealing with predators. Vincent's laugh was forced and nervous. Are you threatening me? Because I can call the police and have you arrested for making terrorist threats. I'm not threatening you, Vincent. I'm educating you about the situation you've created. You have approximately 18 hours to gather your belongings and disappear from Ashley's life permanently. If you're still in that house when I arrive, you'll discover that there are worse things than arrest. You can't do anything to me, Vincent said, but his confidence was wavering. I have rights. Sabrina and I are in a committed relationship, and Ashley needs a father figure who's actually present in her life. Ashley has a father, Vincent, and that father is going to be present very soon. The question is whether you'll be smart enough to leave before he arrives. Derek ended the call and immediately began making arrangements. His team leader would have to complete the Nevada operation without him. Derek's personal war was about to begin. The first call was to his brother Daryl Waters, a former Delta Force operator who now ran a private security company in Phoenix. Daryl had been Derek's best man at his wedding to Sabrina, and he'd been Ashley's godfather since birth. More importantly, he was one of the few people on Earth who understood Derek's capacity for violence when his family was threatened. Derek? It's almost midnight, brother. This better be life or death. It is. Vincent Michael just hit Ashley and threatened both her and me. I need immediate backup in Phoenix. Daryl's voice hardened instantly. What do you need? Full tactical support, surveillance equipment, and someone to watch my back while I handle this situation. Vincent doesn't know what he's walking into, but I want to be prepared for any possibility. Roger that. I'll have a team assembled and ready to move by 0600. What's your timeline? I'm booking the first flight out of Vegas. Should be in Phoenix by 0800. Vincent Michael is about to discover why threatening a Blair family member is the last mistake most people ever make. Derek's second call was to his lawyer, requesting emergency custody modification paperwork that would remove Ashley from any home where Vincent Michael was present. The legal system moved slowly, but Derek's documentation of Vincent's threats and violence would expedite the process. His third call was to a contact at Child Protective Services, reporting suspected child abuse and requesting immediate welfare checks on Ashley Blair. The system would investigate, but Derek wasn't going to wait for bureaucratic processes to protect his daughter. As Derek prepared to leave Nevada, he reflected on Vincent's fundamental miscalculation. The man had assumed that Derek's distance from Phoenix made him powerless to respond to threats against Ashley. He'd assumed that Derek was just another divorced father who would accept being marginalized in his daughter's life. Vincent Michael had no understanding of the man he'd just declared war against. Derek Blair wasn't just another divorced father. He was a predator whose profession was hunting other predators. He'd spent 15 years learning how to track, capture, and neutralize the most dangerous criminals in America. But more importantly, Vincent had threatened the one person Derek loved more than his own life. Ashley represented everything pure and innocent in Derek's world, the only relationship that mattered more than his mission to protect society from human predators. Vincent's threat had transformed Derek from Ashley's father into something much more dangerous, a man with nothing to lose and skills that most people couldn't imagine. The 18-hour window Derek had given Vincent wasn't mercy. It was professional courtesy, an opportunity for Vincent to disappear before Derek arrived to eliminate the threat permanently. As Derek boarded his flight to Phoenix, he had no intention of forgiveness or compromise. Vincent Michael had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the consequences would be permanent and absolute. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Professional. Derek Blair's flight landed in Phoenix at 7:23 a.m., and he was met at the gate by his brother Daryl Waters. To anyone observing, they looked like two middle-aged businessmen greeting each other after a routine trip. In reality, they were special operations veterans whose combined skills had been honed by decades of hunting the most dangerous people on Earth. "What's the situation?" Derek asked without preamble as they walked toward the parking garage. Vincent Michael, age 35, regional manager for Westfield Medical Supply. Clean background, no criminal record, no red flags in his employment history. Lives at 4247 Sunset Ridge Drive with your ex-wife and daughter. Drives a silver Lexus, license plate Arizona 847 JMV. Daryl handed Derek a comprehensive dossier as they reached his black SUV. But here's where it gets interesting. I ran deeper background checks using military databases. Vincent Michael doesn't exist before 7 years ago. Derek looked up from the file. Identity change. Professional level. New social security number, employment history that checks out but feels manufactured, and a credit report that's too perfect. Someone invested serious money in creating this identity. which means Vincent's real background is something he needed to hide. What did you find? Daryl started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage. Vincent Michael used to be Vincent Morrison, and his history explains why he needed a new identity. 3 arrests for domestic violence in California, 2 restraining orders filed by different women, and a sealed juvenile record that my contacts couldn't access. Derek felt the familiar calm that preceded violence settling over him. Vincent wasn't just an abusive boyfriend. He was a predator with a pattern of targeting vulnerable women and children. There's more, Daryl continued. Vincent Morrison disappeared from California right before a grand jury was scheduled to hear testimony in a child abuse case. The victim was his girlfriend's 8-year-old daughter. She recanted her testimony after Vincent disappeared, but the medical evidence was consistent with systematic abuse. He's done this before. Multiple times. I found 2 other cases where Vincent Morrison dated single mothers, gained access to their children, and disappeared when investigations got too close. He's been perfecting his methods for over a decade. Derek studied the photographs in Vincent's file, memorizing every detail of the man who'd been systematically abusing his daughter. Vincent looked ordinary, average height and build, unremarkable features, the kind of face that blended into crowds and was easily forgotten. It was perfect camouflage for a predator. Current surveillance status? I have 2 teams watching the house. Vincent left for work at his normal time, 8:15 a.m. Sabrina took Ashley to school, then returned home alone. No indication that either of them is aware of being watched. Vincent's office. Westfield Medical Supply, 3400 North Central Avenue. 19th floor, corner office with excellent sight lines. Building security is minimal, badge access for employees, visitors sign in for guests. If you want to have a conversation with Vincent at work, it's completely feasible. Derek nodded, already planning the confrontation. Vincent needed to understand exactly who he'd threatened before Derek decided how to eliminate him permanently. Equipment. Daryl gestured toward the back of the SUV. Full tactical kit, surveillance gear, and some items that aren't available through normal channels. I assumed you'd want options for various scenarios. You assumed correctly. They drove through Phoenix's morning traffic in comfortable silence. 2 professionals preparing for an operation that would determine whether Vincent Michael lived through the day. Derek's mind was already calculating angles, escape routes, and the most efficient methods for extracting information before implementing final justice. At 9:45 a.m., Derek entered the Westfield Medical Supply building wearing a perfectly tailored business suit and carrying credentials that identified him as a federal inspector conducting routine compliance checks. The identity was legitimate. Derek maintained several official covers for situations that required legal authority. Vincent's secretary, a nervous woman in her 50s, directed him to Vincent's office without question. Federal inspectors were part of the medical supply business, and unexpected visits were common enough to avoid suspicion. Derek knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Vincent was sitting behind his desk, reviewing reports on his computer screen. He looked up with the practiced smile of a salesman, but the expression died when he recognized Derek's face. Vincent Michael, Derek said, closing the door behind him and engaging the lock. We have some things to discuss. Vincent's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. You can't be here. I'll call security. Go ahead. Derek pulled out his federal credentials and placed them on Vincent's desk. I'm conducting an official investigation into allegations of child abuse. You're welcome to have security escort a federal agent from the premises, but that might raise questions you don't want to answer. Vincent stared at the credentials, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know what Sabrina told you, but Ashley was being disciplined, not abused. There's a difference. Tell me about that difference, Vincent. Explain to me how hitting a 7-year-old girl constitutes appropriate discipline. She was being defiant and disrespectful. Children need structure and consequences, or they grow up thinking they can do whatever they want. Derek pulled out his phone and played a recording of Ashley's call from the previous night. Vincent's face went from pale to ashen as he heard his daughter's terrified voice describing the abuse. Daddy, he grabbed my arm and it still hurts. And my face stings from when he slapped me. Derek stopped the recording and leaned forward in his chair. Vincent, that's my daughter describing injuries you inflicted on her. In most jurisdictions, that constitutes assault on a minor. But we're not going to involve the legal system. What do you want? I want you to understand exactly who you threatened last night. My name is Derek Blair, and for the past 15 years, I've been hunting down people who think they can hide from consequences. I've tracked killers across 3 countries, and I've never failed to bring them back for justice. Derek opened his briefcase and withdrew photographs of some of his more notable captures, armed fugitives who'd been considered uncatchable until Derek had found them. But hunting fugitives is just my day job, Vincent. My real expertise is in understanding predators, how they think, how they operate, and how they can be stopped permanently. Vincent's eyes darted toward the door, but Derek continued speaking in the same conversational tone. For example, I know that you're not really Vincent Michael. You're Vincent Morrison, and you disappeared from California to avoid prosecution for child abuse. I know about the restraining orders, the domestic violence arrests, and the pattern of targeting single mothers to gain access to their children. You can't prove any of that. I don't need to prove it, Vincent. I just need to use it. Derek withdrew a second set of photographs from his briefcase. Surveillance images showing Vincent with previous victims, court documents detailing his history of violence, and medical records from abused children. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign from your position here, effective immediately. You're going to remove all your belongings from Sabrina's house today, and you're going to disappear from Arizona permanently. And if I don't? Derek's smile was genuinely amused. Vincent, you threatened my daughter and issued a challenge to me personally. The only reason you're still breathing is that I want this conversation to be educational rather than final. Derek leaned back in his chair and studied Vincent's face with professional interest. Do you know what happens to child abusers in federal prison, Vincent? Because that's where you'll end up when I present evidence of your true identity to the appropriate authorities. You're bluffing. Am I? Derek withdrew his phone and showed Vincent a text message he'd prepared but not yet sent. The message was addressed to a federal prosecutor in California and contained a detailed summary of Vincent Morrison's current identity and location. One text message, Vincent. That's all it takes to end your carefully constructed new life. But federal prison might be the least of your problems. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper that made Vincent lean forward despite his fear. You see, Vincent, threatening my daughter was the kind of mistake that some people don't survive. I've spent my entire adult life learning how to eliminate threats to innocent people. You represent exactly the kind of threat I was trained to handle. You can't kill me. You're a federal agent. I'm a father first, Vincent. Everything else is secondary to protecting Ashley. Derek stood and walked to the window, looking out at Phoenix's skyline. You have until 6 p.m. today to remove your belongings from Sabrina's house and leave Arizona permanently. If you're still in the state after that deadline, our next conversation will be very different. This is kidnapping. Extortion. I could have you arrested. Derek turned from the window and smiled. Vincent, you're a child abuser operating under a false identity. I'm a federal agent with jurisdiction over interstate fugitives. If you want to involve law enforcement in this situation, I'm confident about how that conversation will end. Derek gathered his credentials and photographs, then paused at the door. One more thing, Vincent. If you ever contact Sabrina or Ashley again, if you ever come within 100 miles of my daughter, you'll discover that there are worse things than prison. Derek left Vincent's office and walked calmly to the elevator, knowing that his message had been received and understood. Vincent Morrison was a predator, but he was also a coward who'd spent his adult life avoiding consequences for his actions. When faced with a more dangerous predator, his survival instincts would override his need to control and dominate. But Derek wasn't going to rely on Vincent's compliance. As he drove away from the Westfield building, he was already implementing the next phase of his plan. Vincent Morrison would disappear from Ashley's life permanently, but Derek needed to ensure that elimination was complete and permanent. The conversation had been educational for both men. Vincent had learned that his carefully constructed new identity was worthless against someone with Derek's resources and skills. Derek had confirmed that Vincent was exactly the kind of predator he'd spent his career eliminating. By 6 p.m., one of them would be gone from Arizona forever. The question was whether Vincent would be smart enough to leave voluntarily or foolish enough to require permanent removal. Chapter 5. The Specialist. Derek left the Westfield building and drove directly to a storage facility on the outskirts of Phoenix, where Daryl had prepared a comprehensive operations center. The facility looked ordinary from the outside, another row of beige metal buildings in Arizona's endless suburban sprawl. Inside Unit 247, however, was equipment that most federal agencies would envy. "How did the conversation go?" Daryl asked as Derek entered the climate-controlled space. "Vincent understands the situation, but I don't trust him to make the smart choice. He's been operating without consequences for too long to suddenly develop good judgment." Derek examined the surveillance monitors showing multiple angles of Sabrina's house, Vincent's apartment building, and his workplace. "What's his movement pattern since I left?" "Interesting developments. Vincent made 3 phone calls immediately after you left his office. The first was to his supervisor, requesting emergency vacation time. The second was to a number registered to a storage facility in Tempe. The third call was to someone who doesn't want to be identified, throwaway phone, no registration information." Derek studied the surveillance footage of Vincent's building. "He's preparing to run, but he's also making arrangements. That third call concerns me. There's more. Vincent left work 15 minutes after you did, but he didn't go home. He drove to the storage facility in Tempe and spent 47 minutes inside Unit 118. When he came out, he was carrying a large duffel bag." Daryl pulled up photographs taken by their surveillance team. The images showed Vincent loading the bag into his Lexus, his face tense with concentration and purpose. "What kind of storage unit requires 47 minutes to access?" "The kind that contains items you don't want found during a routine search. I ran the rental records. Vincent Morrison has been paying for that unit under his real name for 6 years. Whatever's in there, it's connected to his previous identity." Derek felt the familiar tightening in his chest that preceded violence. Vincent wasn't just running. He was retrieving tools or resources that he thought would help him deal with the threat Derek represented. Current location? That's where it gets complicated. Vincent returned to Sabrina's house at 11:30 a.m. Our surveillance team reports that he's been inside for over an hour, and there's been at least one heated argument between him and Sabrina. Derek checked his watch, 12:47 p.m. Ashley would be in school for another 3 hours, which meant she was safe for now. But Vincent's behavior suggested he wasn't planning to accept Derek's ultimatum quietly. "I need to know what's in that storage unit." "Already ahead of you." Daryl handed Derek a tablet displaying the facility's layout and security systems. "Minimal security, no guards, badge access only. Unit 118 is in the back row, isolated from the main traffic patterns. Time frame. Give me 20 minutes to position surveillance on Vincent's location, then the facility is yours." Derek nodded and began changing into the tactical gear Daryl had prepared: black clothing, body armor, and equipment that would allow him to access the storage unit without triggering alarms or leaving evidence of his presence. The drive to the Tempe storage facility took 18 minutes through Phoenix's midday traffic. Derek parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, using delivery trucks and parked cars to mask his movement. His training had taught him to think like his targets, and Vincent Morrison had chosen this location because it offered privacy and minimal security. Unit 118 was exactly where the layout indicated, isolated in the facility's back corner with clear sight lines in all directions. Derek picked the lock in 37 seconds and raised the metal door just enough to slip inside. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. The storage unit was Vincent Morrison's trophy room, containing evidence of a decade-long career of targeting vulnerable families. Photographs covered one wall, hundreds of images showing different women and children in various stages of fear and submission. Some photos showed injuries that were clearly the result of systematic abuse. Others captured moments of terror that suggested Vincent had been documenting his victims' suffering for his own satisfaction. But the photographs were just the beginning. Cardboard boxes contained detailed files on each victim, including personal information, psychological profiles, and what appeared to be strategic plans for gaining control over each family. Vincent hadn't been randomly targeting single mothers. He'd been selecting them based on specific vulnerabilities and developing comprehensive approaches for exploitation. Derek found files on 12 different families spanning 8 years. Each folder contained surveillance photos, copies of personal documents, and handwritten notes detailing the victims' weaknesses and fears. Most disturbing were the progress reports Vincent had written, documenting how successfully he'd isolated each child from protective influences and established his authority through fear and intimidation. The file labeled Sabrina and Ashley Blair was thicker than the others, suggesting Vincent had been planning his approach for months before their first meeting. The folder contained photographs of Ashley taken without her knowledge, copies of Derek and Sabrina's divorce papers, and a detailed psychological profile of both parents that demonstrated extensive research and preparation. But it was the handwritten notes that made Derek's blood turn to ice. Target child shows strong attachment to absent father. Must be systematically undermined. Child is intelligent and observant. Requires careful conditioning to accept new authority structure. Physical discipline must be escalated gradually to avoid detection while establishing absolute control. Derek photographed every document in the storage unit, ensuring he had complete records of Vincent's activities. The evidence would be more than sufficient to guarantee Vincent spent the rest of his life in prison, but Derek had no intention of relying on the legal system to protect future victims. The final box contained items that transformed Vincent from a predator into something much worse. Restraints designed for children, drugs that could incapacitate victims without leaving traces, and recording equipment that suggested Vincent had been documenting his abuse for sale to other predators. Vincent Morrison wasn't just a child abuser. He was part of a network that trafficked in the suffering of innocent children. The storage unit represented a business operation, with Vincent serving as both predator and supplier for customers whose depravity exceeded even Derek's extensive experience with human monsters. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Daryl. Vincent left Sabrina's house. Driving toward Ashley's school. ETA 8 minutes. The message hit Derek like a physical blow. Vincent wasn't running. He was escalating. Whatever he'd retrieved from the storage unit had convinced him that he could handle Derek's threat through direct action against Ashley. Derek immediately called Daryl while securing the storage unit. Lock down Ashley's school now. Whatever Vincent's planning, he's targeting my daughter directly. Roger that. I'm 5 minutes from the school. What's your status? Vincent's storage unit contains evidence of a child trafficking operation. This isn't just about domestic abuse. He's part of a network that sells access to children. Whatever happens next, Vincent Morrison cannot be allowed to disappear again. Derek ran to his vehicle and began racing toward Ashley's school, his mind calculating response times and potential scenarios. Vincent had demonstrated that he was willing to escalate rather than retreat, which meant Ashley was in immediate danger from a predator whose depravity exceeded anything Derek had previously encountered. The conversation at Vincent's office had been educational, but it had also been a mistake. Derek had assumed that Vincent would respond like a rational criminal seeking to minimize consequences. Instead, Vincent had responded like a cornered predator whose access to victims was being threatened. Derek had given Vincent an opportunity to disappear quietly. That mercy had been misplaced, and Ashley was now paying the price for Derek's tactical error. The time for educational conversations had ended. What happened when Derek reached the school would be final and absolute, with no consideration for legal consequences or collateral damage. Vincent Morrison had made his choice. Now Derek would make his. Chapter 6. The Trap. Derek reached Ashley's elementary school at 1:23 p.m. to find Vincent's silver Lexus parked across the street from the main entrance. Daryl's SUV was positioned 50 yards away, providing overwatch while maintaining an inconspicuous presence. Derek parked behind Vincent's vehicle and approached with the measured pace of someone who understood that the next few minutes would determine his daughter's fate. Vincent was sitting in his car, staring at the school entrance with an intensity that confirmed Derek's worst fears. This wasn't a desperate attempt to say goodbye. It was reconnaissance for an abduction. Vincent had concluded that controlling Ashley directly was his only option for maintaining leverage over both Derek and Sabrina. Derek tapped on Vincent's driver's side window with the barrel of his concealed Glock. Vincent startled, then turned to see Derek's face inches from the glass. The fear in Vincent's eyes was immediate and genuine, the reaction of prey recognizing a predator. Step out of the vehicle, Vincent. Slowly. Vincent complied, his movements careful and deliberate. Derek noted that Vincent's hands were shaking and his breathing was shallow, physiological responses to extreme stress that suggested he was operating beyond his comfort zone. This is a public place, Vincent said, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. You can't do anything here. Vincent, I just spent an hour examining your storage unit. I've seen the photographs, the files, and the equipment you use to abuse children. I know about the network you're part of, and I have evidence of crimes spanning 8 years. Vincent's face went from pale to gray as he realized the scope of Derek's knowledge. I don't know what you think you found, but I found 12 files documenting systematic child abuse, Vincent. I found restraints designed for children, drugs for incapacitating victims, and recording equipment that suggests you've been selling access to your victims. Derek's voice remained conversational, but his eyes never left Vincent's face. Most importantly, I found your file on Ashley. Your plans for isolating her from protective influences, your strategy for establishing control through escalating violence, and your timeline for complete domination. You can't prove any of that in court. I'm not interested in court, Vincent. Courts are for people who deserve due process. You're a predator who targets children for abuse and profit. The rules are different for monsters. Derek gestured toward the school where Ashley was finishing her lunch period, unaware that her safety hung in the balance of the conversation happening 50 yards away. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in your car and drive away from here. You're going to leave Arizona permanently, and you're never going to contact Sabrina or Ashley again. If you comply with these instructions, you'll live to see tomorrow. And if I don't? Derek's smile was genuinely amused. Vincent, you came to a school to abduct a 7-year-old girl. You brought restraints and drugs to incapacitate a child. You're part of a network that traffics in child abuse. What do you think happens to people like you when they're exposed? I want to speak to Sabrina. I want to explain my side of this situation. Your side? Derek's voice hardened. Vincent, I've seen the photographs. I've read your notes about conditioning Ashley to accept abuse. There is no side to this situation. There's only a predator who thought he could victimize my daughter. Derek pulled out his phone and showed Vincent a series of images he'd taken in the storage unit. Vincent's face crumpled as he saw his own handwriting describing plans to abuse Ashley. The evidence is already in the hands of federal prosecutors in 3 states. Vincent, your network is about to be exposed, your associates are about to be arrested, and your victims are about to receive justice. The only question is whether you'll be alive to see it happen. Vincent's composure finally shattered completely. Please, I'll do whatever you want. I'll leave town. I'll never contact them again. Just don't hurt me. Vincent, you terrorized a 7-year-old child. You planned to sell access to her abuse to other predators. You came to her school with equipment designed to kidnap and incapacitate her. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. Why would I show mercy to someone who never planned to show mercy to innocent children? Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Daryl, 2 additional vehicles approaching. Possible associates. Derek looked up to see a van and a sedan moving toward the school from different directions. The coordinated approach suggested Vincent hadn't come alone. He'd brought assistance for whatever he'd planned to do to Ashley. Vincent, who else knows about Ashley? I don't know what you're talking about. Derek pressed the Glock against Vincent's ribs hard enough to make him gasp. Vincent, there are 2 vehicles full of people approaching this school right now. If any of them are here to hurt children, you're going to experience pain beyond your imagination before you die. They're just backup. In case you try to stop me from seeing Ashley. Backup for what, Vincent? What exactly did you plan to do at this school? Vincent's eyes darted toward the approaching vehicles, then back to Derek's face. The calculation in his expression revealed that he was weighing his chances of survival against his chances of escape. Tell me about the network, Vincent. Tell me how many people are involved in trafficking children, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see them arrested. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Vincent said, his voice gaining confidence as the vehicles drew closer. This isn't just about me. There are people involved who have resources you can't imagine. People who won't let you destroy what we've built. Derek realized that Vincent's escalation wasn't desperation. It was confidence based on reinforcements he'd summoned. The storage unit hadn't just been a trophy room. It had been a communication center where Vincent had contacted associates and requested assistance. Derek immediately texted Daryl. Implement lockdown protocol. Unknown hostiles approaching with unknown intentions. Within seconds, Derek saw unmarked vehicles moving to intercept the approaching threats, while Daryl's team activated security measures around the school. Whatever Vincent had planned was about to become a tactical operation with Ashley's school as the battlefield. Vincent, you made a serious mistake coming here. But bringing associates to a location where children are present was a fatal mistake. Derek pulled out his federal credentials and displayed them prominently on his vest. "I'm a federal agent, Vincent. This is now a federal crime scene, and everyone approaching this location is about to be arrested for conspiracy to commit child abduction." Vincent's confidence wavered as he saw police vehicles responding to Derek's emergency call. "You can't prove we were planning anything illegal. Vincent, you're at a school with restraints and drugs in your vehicle. Your associates are approaching a school in coordinated fashion. Federal prosecutors don't need much imagination to construct a compelling narrative about what you were planning." The first sedan stopped 50 yards away, and Derek saw armed figures beginning to exit the vehicle. Whatever Vincent's network had planned, they were committed to seeing it through despite the obvious law enforcement presence. Derek made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Ashley's safety was more important than legal procedures, more important than due process, and more important than his own career or freedom. "Vincent, last chance. Call off your people and surrender peacefully, or this situation becomes permanent for everyone involved." "I can't call them off. They're not here for you. They're here for the children." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. Vincent's network wasn't just planning to abduct Ashley. They were planning to abduct multiple children from the school. The coordinated approach, the timing during lunch period, and the number of vehicles all suggested a large-scale operation. Derek immediately activated his emergency beacon, summoning every federal resource in the Phoenix area. But the response time would be measured in minutes, and the threat to the children was immediate. Vincent saw Derek's reaction and smiled for the first time since their confrontation began. "You can't stop what's happening here. Too many people are involved, and they're all committed to completing this operation." Derek looked at the school where Ashley and hundreds of other children were finishing their lunch, unaware that predators were positioning themselves for a coordinated attack. The legal system couldn't respond quickly enough to protect them. Local law enforcement wasn't equipped to handle a tactical operation involving an organized child trafficking network. Derek Blair, federal agent and devoted father, was about to become something else, a man who would do whatever was necessary to protect innocent children from monsters who trafficked in their suffering. The time for conversation had ended. What happened next would be swift, brutal, and absolutely final. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Derek's emergency beacon triggered immediate responses from 3 different federal agencies, but the tactical situation was developing too quickly for official reinforcements to matter. Through his earpiece, he heard Daryl coordinating defensive positions while tracking the movement of Vincent's associates toward the school. 2 vehicles, total of 6 hostiles, all armed, Daryl reported. "They're moving to surround the building. Whatever they're planning, it's happening now." Derek pulled Vincent behind the Lexus as gunfire erupted from the approaching sedan. The bullets shattered the vehicle's windows but left Derek and his captive protected by the engine block. Vincent's network had decided to fight rather than retreat, confirming Derek's assessment that this was a coordinated operation involving desperate people with everything to lose. "Call them off, Vincent," Derek shouted over the sound of automatic weapons fire. "There are children in that building. They won't stop," Vincent replied, his voice cracking with terror. "You don't understand. If this operation fails, everyone involved is dead anyway. They'd rather die fighting than face what happens to child traffickers in federal prison." Derek realized that Vincent's network had reached the same tactical conclusion he had. This confrontation would end with someone dying, and surrender wasn't an option for people whose crimes carried life sentences. Through his scope, Derek saw armed figures moving toward the school's entrances while others provided covering fire. The attack was professional and coordinated, suggesting military or law enforcement backgrounds among the traffickers. These weren't desperate amateurs. They were trained operators who'd turned their skills toward predation. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from the school's principal. Lockdown initiated. 347 children and 28 staff secured in safe rooms. Unknown duration for siege protocols. The message confirmed Derek's worst fears. Vincent's network was attempting to capture an entire school full of children, not just Ashley. The scope of their operation was beyond anything Derek had encountered in 15 years of hunting criminals. Daryl, status report. Perimeter secured on 3 sides, but they've got the main entrance covered with heavy weapons. I count at least 4 hostiles with tactical gear and automatic weapons. These aren't amateurs. Derek studied the tactical situation and made a decision that violated every protocol he'd ever learned. The children in that school were more important than legal procedures, more important than preserving evidence, and more important than his own survival. Vincent, you're going to walk toward that building with me. If your people shoot at us, you die first. If they retreat and let the children go, you live long enough to stand trial. They won't retreat. You killed this operation by coming here. Now everyone involved has nothing left to lose. Derek grabbed Vincent by the collar and began moving toward the school, using the man's body as a shield while advancing on the traffickers' positions. It was a desperate tactic, but Derek's alternatives were limited by the presence of children in the building. 50 yards from the school entrance, Derek saw something that made his blood freeze. One of the armed figures was positioning explosive charges near what appeared to be a utility entrance. If the traffickers couldn't capture the children, they were planning to eliminate witnesses to their operation. Derek immediately called the incident commander for the federal response team that was en route. This is Agent Derek Blair, badge number 4471. I have eyes on hostile forces placing explosive devices at Liberty Elementary School. 347 children and 28 staff are inside the building. Recommend immediate tactical response with bomb disposal capabilities. Agent Blair, our ETA is 12 minutes. Can you maintain containment until we arrive? Derek looked at the explosives being positioned around the building and calculated blast radius against structural integrity. 12 minutes was too long. If the traffickers detonated their charges, the building would collapse with everyone inside. Negative. Threat is immediate. I'm implementing field protocols for child endangerment scenarios. Derek ended the call and turned to Vincent. Those explosives will kill everyone in the building, including the children your people came here to abduct. This operation has turned into a mass murder scenario. I told you they'd rather die than surrender. If they can't complete the mission, they're going to eliminate all the witnesses. The callousness in Vincent's voice triggered something primal in Derek's psychology. This wasn't just a criminal operation. It was a coordinated attack on innocent children by predators who viewed mass murder as an acceptable alternative to capture. Derek made a decision that would define the rest of his life. The legal system couldn't respond quickly enough to save the children. Federal protocols weren't designed for situations where child traffickers had decided to eliminate an entire school. Derek Blair, federal agent, was constrained by laws and procedures that prioritized due process over immediate protection of innocence. But Derek Blair, father, was constrained only by his daughter's safety and his own conscience. Vincent, you're going to call off those explosives right now, or I'm going to start eliminating your associates one by one. I can't control them. They're operating on their own initiative now. Derek pulled out his tactical knife and held it against Vincent's throat. Then you're no longer useful to this operation. The blade was positioned to sever Vincent's carotid artery with minimal pressure, and Vincent understood that Derek had moved beyond threats into implementation. Wait, there's a radio frequency they're monitoring. I can contact them. Derek allowed Vincent to retrieve a small radio from his jacket pocket. The device was military-grade, consistent with Derek's assessment that the traffickers had professional training. Tell them to withdraw immediately, or I start targeting them individually. Vincent activated the radio with shaking hands. This is Control. Abort mission immediately. Federal response is too heavy. Retreat to secondary positions. The response came back immediately. Control, mission parameters have changed. We're implementing scorched earth protocols. No witnesses, no evidence, no survivors. Derek realized that Vincent's authority within the network was limited. The people placing explosives around the school were operating under orders from someone with more authority than Vincent possessed. Derek took the radio from Vincent and spoke directly to the traffickers. This is Federal Agent Derek Blair. I'm offering you one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. If you detonate those explosives, I will hunt down every member of your organization and ensure you face justice for mass murder. The response was immediate and chilling. Agent Blair, your daughter Ashley is very photogenic. We have extensive files on her preferences, her schedule, and her vulnerabilities. If you interfere with our operation, she becomes our primary target for the rest of her very short life. The threat against Ashley triggered something in Derek that went beyond professional training or legal authority. The people surrounding the school weren't just criminals. They were monsters who trafficked in the suffering of children and threatened mass murder to avoid consequences. Derek's transformation from federal agent to protective father was instantaneous and absolute. The legal system had failed to prevent this situation. Federal protocols weren't designed to handle coordinated attacks on schools by child trafficking networks. Derek's oath to protect and serve had become secondary to his fundamental duty as Ashley's father. "Vincent, you made a mistake coming here. But your associates made a fatal mistake threatening my daughter." Derek secured Vincent with restraints that would prevent escape, then began moving toward the school with equipment that wasn't issued by any federal agency. What happened next would be swift, professional, and absolutely final. The traffickers had declared war on innocent children and threatened Derek's daughter specifically. That declaration would be the last mistake any of them ever made. Derek activated his tactical radio and spoke to Daryl. "Implement scorched earth protocols. No prisoners, no evidence, no survivors among the hostiles." The time for legal procedures and due process had ended. What remained was a father protecting his daughter and hundreds of other children from predators who'd chosen mass murder over surrender. The reckoning had begun. Chapter 8. Final Justice. Derek approached the school's east entrance where two traffickers were positioning the final explosive charges. His movement was silent and purposeful, utilizing cover and concealment techniques perfected during 3 combat deployments and 15 years of hunting fugitives. The men were focused on their technical work, unaware that death was approaching with surgical precision. The first trafficker died without awareness. Derek's knife severed his spinal cord at the base of the skull, while his partner was examining timer mechanisms. The second man turned at the sound of his associate's body hitting the ground, but Derek's suppressed pistol ended his life before he could raise an alarm. Derek immediately began disarming the explosives using training he'd received during military deployment in Afghanistan. The devices were sophisticated but followed standard principles. Cutting the wrong wire would detonate them instantly, but Derek's experience with improvised explosive devices allowed him to identify and neutralize the trigger mechanisms. Through his earpiece, Derek heard Daryl engaging the remaining traffickers at the school's main entrance. The gunfire was brief and professional, 3 quick bursts followed by silence that suggested Derek's brother had successfully eliminated the threats to the building's primary access point. Derek's tactical radio crackled with an update. East entrance secured. Explosives neutralized. 2 hostiles eliminated. Roger that. West and north entrances clear. For hostiles eliminated. No friendly casualties. The response came from Carrie Holland, another member of Derek's informal network who'd arrived as backup without being requested. Derek realized that Daryl had activated their entire support system the moment Ashley became threatened. Vincent's vehicle and associates? Secured and eliminated. Vincent is restrained and conscious for questioning. Derek felt a moment of satisfaction that was immediately overshadowed by larger concerns. They'd neutralized the immediate threat to the school, but Vincent's radio communications had suggested a broader network with resources they hadn't encountered yet. Derek made his way back to Vincent's position, where his brother had secured the surviving trafficker with military-grade restraints. Vincent was conscious but clearly traumatized by witnessing the systematic elimination of his associates. "Vincent, your people are dead. Your operation has been dismantled. The explosives have been neutralized, and the children are safe. You have one opportunity to provide information that might help you avoid the death penalty." Vincent stared at Derek with undisguised terror. "You can't execute me. I'm in federal custody. I have rights." "Vincent, you participated in a coordinated attack on an elementary school with intent to abduct children for trafficking purposes. You brought explosives that would have killed 347 children and 28 adults. Your rights are limited to whatever mercy I choose to show you." Derek pulled out his phone and showed Vincent photographs he'd taken of the explosive devices. These charges were positioned to bring down the entire building. Every child inside would have died in the collapse. That's not child trafficking. That's mass murder of innocents. I didn't know about the explosives. I thought they were just planning to take a few kids and leave. Derek's laugh was genuinely amused. "Vincent, you've been part of this network for years. You've participated in the systematic abuse and trafficking of children across multiple states. You don't get to claim ignorance about their methods now." Derek leaned forward until his face was inches from Vincent's. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to provide me with complete information about your network, names, locations, methods, and victim lists. In exchange, you'll live long enough to face trial for your crimes. And if I don't cooperate, then you'll experience the same fate as your associates, and I'll gather the information through other methods. Vincent looked around at the bodies of his fellow traffickers, then back at Derek's implacable expression. The choice was survival through cooperation or immediate elimination through resistance. There are 12 core members of the network, operating in 6 states. We specialize in identifying vulnerable single mothers and gaining access to their children through romantic relationships. The operation generates about 4 million annually through direct trafficking and exploitation videos. Derek recorded every word while taking detailed notes. The information Vincent provided was comprehensive and damning, a complete roadmap to one of the most sophisticated child trafficking networks in American history. Primary coordination is handled through encrypted communications managed by someone called the administrator. I never met him in person, but he controls all financial arrangements and operational security. Location: somewhere in Nevada, maybe Las Vegas or Reno. The administrator uses multiple safe houses and changes locations frequently. Derek realized that eliminating Vincent's cell wouldn't end the threat to Ashley or other children. The network was larger and more sophisticated than he'd initially understood, with leadership that remained hidden and operational security that had kept them undetected for years. Vincent, you're going to help me destroy this entire network. Every member, every safe house, every operational asset. In exchange, you'll receive protection in federal custody and a reduced sentence. If I cooperate with you, the administrator will have me killed. The network has connections inside federal prisons. If you don't cooperate with me, you'll die right here, right now. Your choice is between possible death in prison or certain death in the next 30 seconds. Vincent studied Derek's face and saw something that made his decision easy. Derek Blair wasn't bluffing or negotiating. He was stating facts with the dispassionate certainty of someone who'd killed too many times to feel emotional about the process. I'll cooperate. I'll tell you everything I know about the network, their methods, and their locations. Derek nodded and began securing Vincent for transport to a federal facility. The immediate threat to Ashley and the other children had been eliminated, but Derek's work was far from finished. Federal agents were arriving at the school to process the crime scene and begin official investigations. The traffickers' bodies would be examined, their equipment analyzed, and their communications traced through official channels. But official investigations moved slowly, and the administrator would have time to disappear if Derek relied on legal procedures. Derek made a decision that would define the rest of his career. Vincent's network represented a clear and present danger to children across multiple states. The administrator's willingness to order mass murder to avoid prosecution suggested a level of desperation that made him extremely dangerous to potential witnesses and victims. The legal system would eventually prosecute Vincent and anyone else they could identify through conventional investigation. But Derek possessed information and skills that could expedite justice for victims who couldn't wait for bureaucratic processes. As Derek prepared to leave the school grounds, he received a text from Ashley's teacher. All children safe and accounted for. Ashley is asking for her daddy. Derek smiled for the first time since receiving Ashley's terrified phone call. His daughter was safe. The immediate threat had been eliminated, and the broader network was about to face justice of a kind they'd never imagined. Vincent Morrison and his associates had made a fundamental error in targeting Derek Blair's family. They'd assumed they were dealing with another divorced father who could be intimidated or eliminated through conventional criminal methods. Instead, they declared war on someone whose profession was hunting predators and whose love for his daughter exceeded any consideration of legal constraints or personal safety. The hunt for the administrator and the remaining network members was about to begin. But unlike their previous victims, Derek Blair was a predator who understood exactly how to eliminate threats permanently and completely. Ashley was safe. Vincent was neutralized. The immediate danger had passed. But Derek's work was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Administrator. 3 weeks after the assault on Ashley's school, Derek Blair sat in a federal safe house outside Las Vegas, reviewing intelligence that had taken the combined resources of 3 agencies to gather. Vincent Morrison's cooperation had been extensive and valuable, leading to the arrest of 8 network members and the rescue of 17 children from various trafficking situations. But the administrator remained elusive, protected by operational security measures that suggested either law enforcement or intelligence training. Every lead had terminated in dead ends. Every financial trail had been expertly obscured, and every communication had been routed through systems that defied conventional tracking. Derek's daughter Ashley was staying with his brother Daryl in a secure location in Colorado, protected by former special operations personnel who understood that the administrator's network had both the motivation and resources to target her as leverage against Derek's investigation. The separation was painful but necessary. Derek's hunt for the network's leadership would require tactics that put him beyond the protection of federal authority. Anything new on the financial analysis? Derek asked FBI Special Agent Ronnie Stratton, who'd been assigned as liaison for the Joint Task Force investigating the trafficking network. The administrator's banking arrangements are sophisticated beyond anything we've seen in domestic cases. Multiple offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and shell companies that would require months to unravel through legal channels. Stratton pulled up a complex diagram showing the financial structure supporting the trafficking operation. But Vincent provided information about physical meetings that suggests the administrator operates from a fixed location in Nevada. We're focusing our search on properties that meet specific criteria. Derek studied the search parameters: isolated locations with multiple escape routes, sophisticated communication equipment, and security measures that would deter casual intrusion. The profile matched someone with military or intelligence backgrounds who understood the importance of controlling access and maintaining operational security. Property searches have identified 12 possible locations, but we need probable cause to obtain search warrants. Vincent's testimony is valuable, but defense attorneys will argue that he's cooperating to reduce his own sentence. Derek understood the legal constraints that limited official investigation, but he also understood that the administrator was using those constraints to continue operating while evidence was gathered through proper channels. Every day of delay represented additional children being victimized by a network that viewed mass murder as an acceptable business practice. What about surveillance? Limited resources for continuous monitoring of 12 locations. We're rotating teams, but the administrator could be using any of these properties as temporary safe houses rather than permanent operations centers. Derek realized that the official investigation was moving too slowly to prevent additional victims or capture leadership that was preparing to disappear permanently. The administrator had demonstrated willingness to order the deaths of hundreds of children to protect the network. That level of desperation suggested someone who would eliminate evidence and witnesses rather than risk capture. Derek made a decision that would end his career in federal law enforcement, but might save dozens of children from continued victimization. The official investigation would continue through proper channels, but Derek would implement his own methods for locating and eliminating the administrator. That evening, Derek met with his brother Daryl at a secure location where they could discuss tactics that weren't appropriate for official investigation. Daryl had been conducting independent research using military databases and intelligence contacts that weren't available to civilian law enforcement. "I found him," Daryl announced without preamble. The administrator's real name is Lawrence Potter, former CIA operations officer with extensive experience in psychological warfare and organizational security. Daryl showed Derek a classified file that shouldn't have been accessible to former military personnel. Potter was dismissed from the agency 8 years ago for unauthorized operations involving the manipulation of foreign assets. His expertise was in identifying and exploiting psychological vulnerabilities in target populations. Derek studied Potter's photograph and background information. The man was 53 years old, highly intelligent, and possessed skills that explained the sophisticated security measures protecting his trafficking network. Current location: ranch property 40 miles northeast of Las Vegas. Purchased through a shell company 2 years ago, modified with communication equipment and security systems that are inconsistent with legitimate ranching operations. Daryl pulled up satellite imagery showing the property's layout. Isolated location, multiple escape routes, and defensive positions that suggest Potter is prepared for assault by law enforcement or competing criminal organizations. Derek realized that Lawrence Potter represented the most dangerous type of predator, someone with government training and resources who'd turned those skills toward the systematic victimization of children. Official channels would require months to build a case that might allow Potter to escape or eliminate evidence before capture. What's your assessment for direct action? Potter's security is designed to deter official investigation, but it's vulnerable to assault by personnel with comparable training. He's prepared for FBI raids and organized crime retaliation, but not for former special operations personnel who understand his methods. Derek studied the satellite imagery and began planning an operation that would require skills he'd hoped never to use again. Lawrence Potter had built a fortress designed to protect himself from legal consequences, but he'd never faced someone with Derek's specific combination of federal authority and military training. Timeline: Potter is planning to disappear within 72 hours. Vincent's arrest and cooperation have compromised too much of the network for continued operations. Our intelligence suggests Potter is eliminating evidence and preparing to establish new operations in Southeast Asia. Derek realized that official investigation had run out of time. If Potter escaped to countries without extradition treaties, he would continue trafficking children while remaining beyond the reach of American justice. The legal system had been too slow to protect Potter's victims, and Derek's official authority was insufficient to prevent his escape. Derek Blair, federal agent, was constrained by laws and procedures that prioritized due process over immediate protection of innocence. But Derek Blair, father of a daughter who'd been targeted by Potter's network, was constrained only by his conscience and his commitment to ensuring that predators faced justice. The next morning, Derek submitted his resignation to federal law enforcement and began preparing for an operation that would ensure Lawrence Potter never victimized another child. What happened at Potter's ranch would be swift, professional, and absolutely final. Potter had made a mistake in targeting Ashley Blair and threatening mass murder at her school. That mistake had identified him to someone whose profession was hunting predators and whose commitment to protecting children exceeded any consideration of legal constraints. The administrator's network had terrorized children across multiple states while hiding behind sophisticated security measures and government connections. But they'd never faced someone with Derek's specific skills and personal motivation. Lawrence Potter was about to discover that there were worse things than federal prosecution for child trafficking. He was about to face a father whose daughter had been threatened by monsters, and who possessed both the skills and determination to ensure those monsters never threatened anyone again. The final hunt was about to begin. 48 hours later, law enforcement officials investigating an explosion at a remote Nevada ranch would find evidence of a sophisticated child trafficking operation, multiple victims who could finally receive justice, and the remains of Lawrence Potter, who had apparently died while attempting to destroy evidence of his crimes. Derek Blair would never return to federal law enforcement. Instead, he would disappear into the American landscape, protected by new identities and resources that allowed him to continue hunting predators who thought themselves beyond the reach of justice. Ashley Blair would grow up safe and protected, never knowing the full extent of what her father had done to ensure her safety. She would remember Vincent Morrison as a bad man who'd hurt her once, but who'd disappeared before he could hurt anyone else. The trafficking network that had terrorized children across 6 states would be completely dismantled, with survivors receiving counseling and support, while perpetrators faced justice through official channels or more permanent solutions implemented by Derek's methods. Vincent Morrison would serve a life sentence in federal prison, where his fellow inmates would learn about his crimes against children and implement their own form of justice. He would not survive his first year in custody. Derek's transformation from federal agent to guardian angel was complete. Somewhere in America, predators who victimized children would continue to face a hunter whose skills exceeded their security measures and whose commitment to justice exceeded their ability to hide. The monsters would never be safe. The children would be.